Hi everyone, this is Daisy here, and today I'm going to read an excerpt from the story of the Book of Thoth. And I felt like this story is going to be really pivotal for a lot of us right now who are currently dealing with individuals who basically don't believe in anything regarding like universal law and balance, and who misuse and abuse spiritual texts. And I put on my community board the other day that I felt like there needs to be more care taken into who gets access to different forms of spiritual knowledge and information. And I feel like this story right here is going to highlight that, okay? Now, Ahura was the wife of Neferkaptah, and their child was Merab. This was the name by which he was registered by the scribes in the House of Life. And Neferkaptah, though he was the son of the king, cared for not on earth, but to read the ancient records written on papyrus in the House of Life or engraved on stone in the temples. All day and every day he studied the writings of the ancestors. One day he went into the temple to pray to the gods, but when he saw the inscriptions on the walls, he began to read them, and he forgot to pray. He forgot the gods, he forgot the priests, he forgot all that was around him until he heard laughter behind him. He looked around, and a priest stood there, and from him came the laughter. "Why thou laughest at me?" said Neferkaptah. "Because thou readest these worthless writings," answered the priest. "If thou wouldest read writings that are worth the reading, I can tell thee where the book of Thoth lies hidden." Then Neferkaptah was eager in his question, and the priest replied, "Thoth wrote the book with his own hand, and in it all the magic in the world. If thou readest the first page, thou wilt enchant the sky, the earth, the abyss, the mountains, and the sea. Thou wilt understand the language of the birds of the air, and thou wilt know what the creeping things of earth are saying, and thou wilt see the fishes from the darkest depths of the sea. And if thou readest the other page, even though thou were dead and in the world of ghosts, thou couldst come back to earth in the form thou once had. And besides this, thou wilt see the sun shining in the sky with the full moon and the stars, and thou wilt behold the great shapes of the gods." Then said Neferkaptah, "By the life of Pharaoh, that book shall be mine. Tell me whatsoever it is that thou desirest, and I will do it for thee." "Provide for my funeral," said the priest. "See that I am buried as a rich man, with priests and mourning women, offerings, libations, and incense. Then shall my soul rest in peace in the fields of Alu. 100 pieces of silver must be spent upon my burying." Then Neferkaptah sent a fleet messenger to fetch the money, and he paid 100 pieces of silver into the priest's hands. When the priest had taken the silver, he said to Neferkaptah, "The book is at Koptos, in the middle of the river. In the middle of the river is an iron box. In the iron box is a bronze box. In the bronze box is a Khete wood box. In the Khete wood box is an ivory and ebony box. In the ivory and ebony box is a silver box. In the silver box is a gold box. And in the gold box is the book of Thoth. Round about the great iron box are snakes and scorpions and all manners of crawling things, and above all there is a snake which no man can kill. These are set to guard the book of Thoth." When the priest had finished speaking, Neferkaptah ran out of the temple, for his joy was so great that he knew not where he was. He ran quickly to Ahura to tell her about the book, and that he would go to Koptos and find it. But Ahura was very sorrowful and said, "Go not on this journey, for trouble and grief await thee in the southern land." She laid her hand upon Neferkaptah, and as though she would hold him back from the sorrow that awaited him. But he would not be restrained, and broke away from her and went to the king his father. He told the king all that he had learned, and said, "Give me thy royal barge, O my father, that I may go to the southern land with my wife Ahura and my son Merab. From the book of Thoth I must and will have." So the king gave orders, and the royal barrage was prepared, and in it Neferkaptah, Ahura, and Merab sailed upon the river to the southern land as far as Koptos. When they arrived at Koptos, the high priest and all the priestess of Isis of Koptos came down to the river to welcome Neferkaptah, sacrificed an ox and a goose, and poured a libation of wine to Isis of Koptos and her son Hippocrates. After this, the priests of Isis and their wives made a great feast for 4 days in the honor of Neferkaptah and Ahura. On the morning of the 5th day, Neferkaptah called to him a priest of Isis, a great magician learned in the mysteries of gods. And another they made a little magic box. Like the cabin of a boat, they made men and a great store of tackle, and put the men and the tackle in the magic cabin. When they uttered a spell over the cabin, and the men breathed and were alive, and began to use the tackle. And Neferkaptah sank the magic cabin in the river, saying, "Workmen, workmen, work for me." And he filled the royal barge with sand and sailed away alone, while Ahura sat on the bank of the river at Koptos and watched and waited, for she knew that sorrow must come with this journey to the southern land. The magic men in the magic cabin toiled all night and all day for 3 nights and 3 days along the bottom of the river. And when they stopped, the royal barge stopped also. And Neferkaptah knew that he had arrived where the book lay hidden. He took the sand out of the royal barge and threw it into the water, and it made a gap in the river, a gap of a shoenos long and a shoenos wide. In the middle of the gap lay the iron box. And beside the box was coiled the great snake that no man can kill. And all around the box on every side to the edge of the walls of water were snakes and scorpions and all manner of crawling things. Then Neferkaptah stood up in the royal barge, and across the water he cried to the snakes and scorpions and crawling things, a loud and terrible cry. And the words were words of magic. As soon as his voice was still, the snakes and scorpions and crawling things were still also, for they were enchanted by means of the magical words of Neferkaptah. And they could not move. Neferkaptah brought the royal barge to the edge of the gap, and he walked through the snakes and scorpions and crawling things, and they looked at him, but could not move because of the spell that was on them. Now Neferkaptah was face to face with the snakes that no man could kill, and it reared itself up ready for battle. Neferkaptah rushed upon it and cut off its head, and at once the head and body came together, each to each, and the snake that no man could kill was alive again and ready for the fray. Again Neferkaptah rushed upon it, and so hard did he strike that the head was flung far from the body, but at once the head and body came together again, each to each, and again the snake that no man could kill was alive and ready to fight. Then Neferkaptah saw that the snake was immortal and could not be slain, but must be overcome by subtle means. Again he rushed upon it and cut it in two, and very quickly he put sand on each part, so that when the head and body come together again, there was sand between them, and they could not join, and the snake that no man could kill lay helpless before him. Then Neferkaptah went to the great box, where it stood in the gap in the middle of the river. And the snakes and scorpions and crawling things watched, but they could not stop him. He opened the iron box and found a bronze box. He opened the bronze box and found a Kete wood box. He opened the Kete wood box and found an ivory and ebony box. He opened the ivory and ebony box and found a silver box. He opened the silver box and found a gold box. He opened the gold box and found the book of Thoth. He opened the book and read a page, and at once he had enchanted the sky, the earth, the abyss, the mountains, and the sea, and he understood the language of birds, fish, and beasts. He read the second page, and he saw the sun shining in the sky, with the full moon and the stars, and he saw the great shapes of the gods themselves, and so strong was the magic that the fishes came up from the darkest depths of the sea. So he knew that what the priest had told him was true. Then he thought of Ahura waiting for him at Cap Koptos, and he cast a magic spell on the men that he had made, saying, "Workmen, workmen, work for me, and take me back to the place from which I came." They toiled day and night until they came to Koptos, and there was Ahura sitting by the river, having eaten nothing and drunk nothing, since Neferkaptah went away. For she sat waiting and watching for the sorrow that was to come upon them. But when she saw Neferkaptah returning in the royal barge, her heart was glad and she rejoiced exceedingly. Neferkaptah came to her and put the book of Thoth into her hands and bade her read it. When she read the first page, she enchanted the sky, the earth, the abyss, the mountains, and the sea. And she understood the language of birds, fish, and beasts. And when she read the second page, she saw the sun shining in the sky, with the full moon and the stars. And she saw the great shapes of the gods themselves. And so strong was the magic that the fishes came up from the darkest depths of the sea. Neferkaptah now called for a piece of new papyrus and for a cup of beer. And on the papyrus he wrote all the spells that were in the book of Thoth. Then he took the cup of beer and washed the papyrus in the beer, so that all the ink was washed off, and the papyrus came as though it had never been written on. And Neferkaptah drank the beer, and at once he knew all the spells that had been written on the papyrus, for this is the method of the great magicians. Then Neferkaptah and Ahura went to the temple of Isis and gave offerings to Isis and Hippocrates and made a great feast. And the next day they went on board the royal barge and sailed joyfully away down the river towards the northern land. But behold, Thoth had discovered the loss of his book, and Thoth raged like a panther of the south, and he hastened before Ra and told him all saving. Neferkaptah has found my magic book and box and opened it, and has stolen my book, even the book of Thoth. He slew the guards that surrounded it, and the snake that no man could kill lay helpless before him. Avenge me, O Ra, upon Neferkaptah, son of the king of Egypt. The majesty of Ra answered and said, "Take him and his wife and his child, and do with them as thou wilt." And now the sorrow for which Ahura watched and waited was about to come upon them. For Thoth took with him a power from Ra to give him his desire upon the stealer of his book. This is where it gets interesting. As the royal barge sailed smoothly down the river, the little boy Merab ran out from the shade of the awning and leaned over the side watching the river, and the power of Ra drew him so that he fell into the river and was drowned. When he fell, all the sailors on the royal barge and all the people walking on the riverbank raised a great cry, but they could not save him. Neferkaptah came out of the cabin and read a magic spell over the water, and the body of Merab came to the surface, and they brought it on the board the royal barge. Then Neferkaptah read another spell, and so great was its power that the dead child spoke and told Neferkaptah all that had happened among the gods, that Thoth was seeking vengeance, and that Ra had granted him his desire upon the stealer of this book. Neferkaptah gave command, and the royal barge returned to Koptos, that Merab might be buried there with the honor due to the son of a prince. When the funeral ceremonies were over, the royal barge sailed down the river toward the northern land. A joyful journey was it no longer, for Merab was dead, and Ahura's heart was heavy on account of the sorrow that was still to come. The vengeance of Thoth was not yet fulfilled. They reached the place where Merab had fallen into the water, and Ahura came out from under the shade of the awning as she leaned over the side of the barge, and the power of Ra drew her so that she fell into the river and was drowned. When she fell, all the sailors in the royal barge and all the people walking on the riverbank raised a great cry, but they could not save her. Neferkaptah came out of the cabin and read a magical spell over the water, and the body of Ahura came to the surface, and they brought it on board the royal barge. Then Neferkaptah read another spell, and so great was its power that the dead woman spoke and told Neferkaptah all that had happened among the gods, that Thoth was still seeking vengeance, and that Ra had granted him his desire upon the stealer of his book. Neferkaptah gave command, and the royal barge returned to Koptos, that Ahura might be buried there with the honor due to the daughter of a king. When the funeral ceremonies were over, the royal barge sailed down the river towards the northern land. A sorrowful journey was it now, for Ahura and Merab were dead, and the vengeance of Thoth was not yet fulfilled. They reached the place where Ahura and Merab had fallen into the water, and Neferkaptah felt the power of Ra drawing him. Though he struggled against it, he knew it would conquer him. He took a piece of royal linen, fine and strong, and made it into a girdle, and with it he bound the book of Thoth firmly to his breast, for he was resolved that Thoth should never have his book again. Then the power drew him yet more strongly, and he came from under the shade of the awning and threw himself into the river and was drowned. When he fell, all the sailors of the royal barge and all the people walking on the riverbank raised a great cry, but they could not save him. And when they looked for his body, they could not find it. So the royal barge sailed down the river. They reached the northern land and came to Memphis, and the chiefs of the royal barge went to the king and told him all that had happened. The king put on mourning raiment. He and his courtiers, the high priest and all the priests of Memphis, the king's army and the king's household were clothed in mourning apparel, and they walked in procession to the haven of Memphis, to the royal barge. When they came to the haven, they saw the body of Neferkaptah floating in the water besides the barge, close to the great steering oars, and this marvel came to pass because of the magical powers of Neferkaptah. Even in death, he was a great magician by reason of the spells he had washed off the papyrus and drunk in the beer. Then they drew him out of the water, and they saw the book of Thoth bound to his breast with the girdle of royal linen. And the king gave command that they should bury Neferkaptah with the honor due to the son of a king, and that the book of Thoth should be buried with him. This was the vengeance of Thoth fulfilled, and the book remained with Neferkaptah. The end. Wow. Think about that. Neferkaptah. He wanted to obtain the greatest treasure on earth, which is the book of Thoth, so he would become an all-powerful magician. He was told only half of what the journey entailed by the man who he gave only 100 pieces of silver to tell him about how to get to the book. And he wanted a royal burial and things like that to be sent off. So he did it. He went and got that book. He slayed the snake. He got the book. And upon getting the book, he forgot one thing, that he did not consult with the gods to see if that was actually what he should have been doing in the first place. And thus, upon slaying all of those, passing all those different levels of initiation, which is one using speech to freeze his enemies, and then getting into the different boxes and open each of them, and then getting the book, he lost everything. They killed his son first, and took his wife, and then ultimately he was taken. And I believe at every tragedy, in terms of the grief that he experienced, he realized that in order for him to have gotten that magic in that book, that there was something that he was supposed to sacrifice. He was never told that, you see. by the priest. And this is, one of the things that we were talking about in one of the channelings I put out in terms of these different karmics. They were going to any length to find different types of magic and spell work to bind you and block you and cause harm and do all these different things. And in the process, they didn't realize that they had to give up something great in order to have that power that they were using over you, right? In order to block your destiny. So not only are they getting karma for summoning those beasts and deities that they had no business summoning in the first place, right? They also are getting karma for the ways in which they try to block your destiny and your path using those different mechanisms. So it's like you always have to give up something in order to be obtaining some type of power. It doesn't come for free, right? So, even when you deal with individuals who have like a narcissistic personality disorder and they want to have power over you by being passive aggressive or outwardly aggressive or dominating or tyrannical, they have to give something up. And remember, it's a piece of their humanity. We talked about that, because when you dehumanize other people, you dehumanize yourself. And sometimes they may not even see their behavior as such, but that's what they're doing. In order for them to try to take away some of your pieces, some of your joy, they have to give up some of their humanity, like in terms of why does it excite you to behave in that way? Because only archonic spirits that feed off of friction, energy of trauma and chaos and frustration like that. So anyways, this was a very interesting story, and I feel like it all ties into what we're going to be seeing in the near future with some of these false prophets who are going to be first being stripped of whatever power they thought that they have, fame, attention, whatever, and they're going to be forced to realize that they paid with a double-edged sword when it comes to knowledge and spirituality and having the attention of the masses. Because when you do have a attention of a large group of people, it's kind of like when you already know that where this world is vibrationally and where we need to be going, you get karma for misusing the power that you have for having a whole attention of groups of people, right? So it's like you misled their consciousness, and as you were blind and following other people who are blind, you're leading a bunch of people with you. There's karma for that, because you're leading people into an unsuccessful rebellion. That's how we get Ifshet children, right? And Ifshet in ancient Egypt were children who they wanted to align themselves with Set, feeling that they got power from chaos and disorder, not knowing that they are working against universal order and balance. And you get power for acting in alignment with universal order and balance, but they wanted quick power, so they align with Set. So therefore, they're children of Ifshet. They're children of unsuccessful rebellion. We'll be talking about that more too as time goes on. But yeah, and then for him to get that magic and get that book, he had to sacrifice. And ultimately, it was his life. And then you notice that he tied the book to him and he jumped into the water like, okay, no one can ever have this book. No one else can ever have this knowledge because it's a disaster. And they buried him with the book. And at the end of the day, Thoth got what he wanted, that his book not be opened up again. And that taught people a lesson. So let this be a lesson. When I was talking about certain people have to come from a lineage, you have to be ordained to be a part of certain forms of knowledge and wisdom. And you'll know that you're ordained when you have successfully accomplished certain spiritual tasks. The first one is the consumption in the material world, the mastering the lower chakras. The next is mastering the higher chakras, which is, yes, you have this power. Now, how are you going to use it? And also, too, how can you continue to walk that fine line of love and hate, right? Of being good or bad or that type of thing, okay? So that's the story that I had for y'all. I hope you enjoy this. I hope you enjoy that story, and I hope you enjoy kind of some of like what I got in terms of the analysis and the meaning of that story in present day. Be ordained. All right. Hope you enjoy. Bye.